It began with a signature. One piece of paper, a few lines of legal text, and the life Prince Harry had imagined for himself and his family shifted overnight. Imagine waking up one morning, thinking the world is your oyster, only to find that the very rules you've grown up believing in, the ones that seemed permanent, sacred, unchangeable, have been rewritten. That's exactly what happened in the corridors of Buckingham Palace, in a story so shocking, so utterly unprecedented, that it has left royal watchers, insiders, and the public reeling. By the end of this video, you'll see the royal family not as you thought you knew them, but in a completely new, almost unrecognizable light. Prince Harry has always lived under scrutiny, a life that balanced the grandeur of royal tradition with his own desperate desire for autonomy. Born into a world of privilege, he also inherited the weight of expectation. Every move, every word, every glance, examined, dissected, judged. And yet, even with all the pressure, Harry had his vision of the future, a life where he could serve, protect, and ultimately be recognized for who he was, not just for whose son he happened to be. But that vision, painstakingly nurtured over decades, collapsed with one act. King Charles signed a document, and in doing so, altered the line of succession, removing not only Harry but his children, Archie and Lilibet, from the chain that determines who will one day wear the crown. Before we continue, please hit the like button, subscribe to the channel, and turn on the notification bell for updates. Think about that for a second. Removed from succession, overnight, without warning. A legal twist so powerful it doesn't just affect the titles or privileges. It hits at identity, legacy, and family. What does it feel like to have your place in history erased while you are still alive to witness it? How do you reconcile the love for a family with the anger that comes when they make decisions that feel, to you, like betrayal? These are the questions Prince Harry now faces, questions that no public relations team, no social media post, and no private meeting can fully answer. This isn't just a story about paperwork and protocols. It's a story about family dynamics on a scale most people can hardly imagine. Imagine your father, the head of your family, suddenly declaring that you no longer matter in the family legacy. The stakes are higher because this isn't just personal, it's global. Every move, every reaction, is scrutinized by millions. Every decision sends ripples across tabloids, news channels, and social media, transforming private grief into public spectacle. And Harry? He is right in the eye of this storm, forced to navigate emotions most of us can only glimpse through headlines. But let's rewind for a moment. To understand why this moment is so explosive, we need context. The relationship between Prince Harry and King Charles has always been complicated. From the start, Charles's expectations were enormous. He envisioned a son who would follow tradition, embrace duty, and maintain the sanctity of the monarchy. Harry, however, was restless. He questioned protocols. He challenged narratives. He refused to be boxed in. Over the years, subtle tensions escalated. Public disagreements, private frustrations, and whispers of disapproval created a backdrop that few understood fully. For decades, the world saw pageantry, ceremony, and a family united by blood. The reality, however, was fraught with conflict, envy, and heartbreak. And now, in what insiders are calling the most audacious move in recent royal history, Charles acted decisively. One signature, one official document, and the rules changed. To most, this might sound like routine legal maneuvering, a bureaucratic adjustment that happens behind closed doors. But to those living it, the consequences are life-altering. Harry, who has spent years trying to carve out a space for himself and his family within, or sometimes outside. The monarchy now faces a reality he never anticipated. His children, too, feel the immediate effects. Archie and Lilibet, who barely understand the full weight of their royal heritage, have been suddenly removed from the line of succession, their future roles within the institution no longer guaranteed. And yet, even as shock waves radiate outward, the palace maintains a veneer of calm. Public statements are carefully crafted. Media narratives are managed. Official channels emphasize legality, duty, and necessity. But behind the closed doors of royal estates, the emotional toll is immense. Harry reportedly spent hours in private reflection, grappling with a mix of fury, disbelief, and deep sadness. There are reports of whispered confrontations, private letters, and late-night phone calls that reveal the human side of this constitutional drama. For Harry, this isn't about headlines or public perception. It's about identity, about family, and about a future he now realizes he cannot control in the way he once imagined. The question becomes, why now? Why this moment, this decision, this document? Some insiders suggest it was the culmination of years of quiet planning. Others point to immediate political pressures, a need to solidify succession lines, or even personal motivations by Charles himself. The truth is, no one outside the inner circle knows the full story, and perhaps that ambiguity is part of the strategy. Uncertainty creates power, and in the royal family, power has always been meticulously managed. But for Harry, that uncertainty feels like betrayal. And for the public, it feels like the opening act of a drama that has been decades in the making, one with consequences that could reshape the monarchy forever. Even more striking is the broader question this raises. What does it mean for the monarchy as an institution when its members are at odds in such a deeply personal way? Public confidence hinges on the appearance of unity. The removal of Harry and his children from the line of succession disrupts that image, raising uncomfortable questions about fairness, favoritism, and the future relevance of a centuries-old institution. Every move will be dissected, every word analyzed, and every facial expression scrutinized. And in this environment, mistakes are amplified, misunderstandings become scandals, and the human cost is enormous. For Prince Harry, the personal stakes are intertwined with the public. Every decision, every emotion, is magnified in the court of public opinion. But beneath the headlines, there is the man himself, someone who has spent years trying to navigate the impossible balancing act between duty, personal happiness, and the pressures of being a royal. And now, with the line of succession rewritten, he must confront questions that have no easy answers. How do you fight for your place in a family that has just declared, in effect, that you no longer belong? How do you protect your children when their futures have been suddenly altered by forces beyond their control? And how do you do all of this under the relentless gaze of the world? As the story unfolds, one thing becomes clear: this is not merely a legal adjustment. It is a deeply human tale of anger, disappointment, and love complicated by duty and tradition. It is about a father and son at odds, a family under pressure, and children caught in the middle. It is about the collision of personal ambition and institutional authority, and the emotional fallout that follows. And it is about the choices Harry will make. Choices that will determine not just his future, but the future of those he loves most. But here's the twist. Even in this moment of upheaval, there are hints of resilience, strategy, and unexpected alliances. Harry is not one to accept defeat quietly. He is a man who has consistently defied expectations, challenged convention, and carved his own path. And though the document may have altered the rules, it has not yet determined the outcome. The battle over legacy, identity, and succession has only just begun, and what comes next will shock those who think they understand the monarchy, the family, and the man at the center of this storm. So, as we dive deeper into this story, keep this in mind. Nothing is as it seems. Every conversation, every decision, every emotion is layered with history, expectation, and consequence. And the document that erased Harry from the line of succession is just the beginning. What follows is a journey into the heart of one of the most scrutinized families in the world, a tale of betrayal, courage, and the struggle to define one's place in a world that constantly seeks to define you. By the end, you may find yourself questioning not just the monarchy, but the very nature of family, loyalty, and destiny. It started like any other morning in London, the kind of crisp day where the city hums with routine, unaware of the seismic shift about to shake one of its oldest institutions. But for Prince Harry, this was no ordinary morning. Behind the gilded doors of Buckingham Palace, a document had been signed, a single, seemingly innocuous piece of paper that would rewrite the very fabric of his life. In a matter of hours, Harry, Archie, and Lilibet would find themselves removed from the line of succession. One signature, one decisive stroke, and the future they had imagined evaporated. Imagine it. All your dreams, your place in history, your very identity tied to a family legacy, and suddenly, it's all altered without warning. That was Harry's reality. He had spent decades navigating a delicate balance, honoring tradition while carving out his own space, seeking a life that allowed him autonomy without completely severing ties to the crown. Now, that balance had been obliterated in an instant. The bombshell didn't arrive quietly. Rumors had been circulating for weeks, whispers of legal maneuvers, of meetings convened in secret, of advisors pressing the king to act. But no one, not even Harry, could have anticipated the scale of what was about to happen. It wasn't just about the line of succession. It was about identity, legacy, and control. And when the news broke, the world watched, riveted, as the palace tried to contain the storm. Inside the palace, tension crackled like static electricity. Advisors whispered in hushed tones, the air thick with anticipation and dread. King Charles, stoic yet determined, signed the document with a steady hand, aware of the repercussions but convinced of the necessity. Every royal, every aide, knew that this decision would reverberate far beyond these walls. And then came the moment that would change everything. The announcement that Harry and his children had been officially removed from succession. For Harry, the initial reaction was disbelief. It's one thing to anticipate disagreement, tension, or even criticism within a royal family, but it is another to face a reality that undermines your very existence within that lineage. According to insiders, Harry spent hours pacing, phone in hand, processing the unimaginable. The weight of betrayal pressed down on him, not from a stranger, but from his father, the man whose approval he had sought his entire life. The emotional toll was immediate and intense. There was anger, of course, a white-hot, consuming rage that surged through him as he contemplated the audacity of the act. But there was also grief, a profound sorrow for the future his children would never inherit in the way he had hoped. Archie and Lilibet, innocent and oblivious to the machinations of the palace, were suddenly pawns in a game that stretched back centuries. The injustice felt personal, an affront to both family and identity. Meanwhile, the palace faced an entirely different kind of challenge: public perception. The media had already smelled the story before the ink was dry. News outlets speculated, social media erupted, and the world's gaze focused squarely on one family, one decision, one bombshell. Spin doctors scrambled, crafting statements that emphasized legality and tradition, but beneath the official narrative was chaos, rumor, and fear. The optics were just as critical as the law itself, and the palace knew that every misstep could ignite an international scandal. And then there were the private conversations, the moments unseen by the public. Harry's confidants described tense phone calls, whispered confrontations, and secretive strategy sessions. The prince's inner circle became a pressure cooker of emotion, balancing loyalty to him with the impossible task of navigating royal protocol. Every word mattered. Every decision carried weight far beyond its apparent significance. And amidst it all, Harry grappled with a central question. How do you respond when your father, the head of the family, redefines the rules without warning? But the bombshell extended beyond the personal. It had legal ramifications that were just as staggering. Constitutional experts scrambled to interpret the document, analyzing clauses, historical precedent, and potential loopholes. Some argued that the king's action, while dramatic, fell within his authority. Others warned that legal challenges were inevitable, predicting a series of battles that could drag on for years. For Harry, these debates were more than theoretical, they were existential. His identity, his children's place in history, even the public perception of his family, hinged on the outcome. The world watched with bated breath. Headlines screamed, commentators speculated, and social media users debated the implications of a monarchy seemingly in crisis. How could such a storied institution, steeped in centuries of tradition, unravel in a single morning? And what did it say about the dynamics within one of the most famous families on the planet? People asked themselves, if the heir apparent can make a decision of this magnitude, what does it mean for the balance of power, for fairness, for the very essence of monarchy itself? Amidst the global spectacle, Harry remained focused on the personal. He thought of his children, of the innocence suddenly stolen from them, and of the anger and frustration that coursed through him. Reports suggest he was torn between responding publicly, retreating into privacy, or seeking a more strategic path forward. Each option carried risks. Each choice demanded careful calculation. The stakes were unprecedented, and the consequences could define his legacy. And yet, even as Harry grappled with the enormity of the situation, there were subtle signs that all was not lost. Allies within and outside the palace began to emerge, offering counsel, support, and alternative strategies. Friends, confidants, and legal experts started to map out what could be done next. For Harry, this was a moment of reckoning. A chance to reclaim agency, even as the walls of tradition seemed to close in around him. But the shockwave was far from over. The palace itself, a symbol of unyielding authority, faced pressures it had rarely encountered. Advisors debated, factions emerged, and whispers of dissent circulated. Even within the royal family, loyalties were questioned, alliances tested, and secrets threatened to surface. The decision that had removed Harry and his children from succession was only the beginning, a catalyst for drama that would escalate in ways no one could have anticipated. Public interest reached fever pitch. News anchors framed the story as unprecedented, tabloids ran with every possible angle, and social media platforms buzzed with speculation. People around the world debated morality, legality, and family dynamics, drawing their own conclusions about what justice, fairness, and loyalty truly meant in the context of monarchy. Every comment, every post, every article added layers to a story already rife with complexity, emotion, and intrigue. Yet, in the midst of this maelstrom, one truth became increasingly clear. Prince Harry was not a passive actor in his own story. This was not a tale of quiet resignation or acceptance. He had faced adversity before, challenged expectations, and defied convention. The signature that altered the succession may have been the most dramatic act yet, but it was by no means the final chapter. Harry's reaction, his strategies, and his next moves would continue to shape the narrative, keeping the world watching, guessing, and invested in every twist and turn. And while the palace attempted to maintain control over the optics, over the public statements, and over the narrative itself, cracks were already appearing. Internal disagreements, private confrontations, and the sheer weight of unprecedented public scrutiny threatened to destabilize carefully curated images. Harry's removal was more than a legal maneuver. It was a spark that could ignite lasting change, revealing fractures and tensions that had long been hidden beneath ceremonial pomp. By now, the world understood that this was no ordinary royal decision. It was a bombshell that combined legality, emotion, and personal drama into a story with unprecedented global impact. And for Harry, the stakes could not have been higher. The moment demanded decisions, reflection, and action, and the consequences of each choice would ripple far beyond the palace walls. Imagine a line of people, stretching across centuries, each carefully placed in a chain of inheritance that dictates not just who wears a crown, but who embodies centuries of tradition, power, and expectation. That chain, for the royal family, is sacred. It is law, ritual, and history all rolled into one. And yet, in a single act, that chain was broken, rewritten, and rearranged, sending shockwaves through both the palace and the world. Prince Harry, along with his children Archie and Lilibet, had been removed from the line of succession, an action that was unprecedented in modern times. To truly understand the impact, we need to examine what succession looked like before this moment. At the top, of course, was King Charles III, who inherited the crown following the death of Queen Elizabeth II. Directly following him was Prince William, his eldest son, poised to one day ascend to the throne. Next in line were William's children, George, Charlotte, and Louis. Each assigned their place according to a meticulous order defined by centuries of tradition and, more recently, gender-neutral succession laws. Harry, as Charles's second son, occupied a position of relative prominence. He was fifth in line at birth, a position that came with expectations, visibility, and responsibilities. His role in the monarchy was clear. He was not the heir apparent, but he was part of the line, part of the institution, and part of history. Archie and Lilibet, born into this world, inherited the same proximity to the throne, though in a more symbolic sense. Their existence within the line of succession represented continuity, family legacy, and the potential for influence. But the document signed by Charles changed all that. With one stroke, Harry, Archie, and Lilibet were excised from the chain. It was as if an editor had taken a red pen to history, erasing their names, and rewriting the story in a way that would alter not only the family dynamic but the public's perception of the monarchy. The implications were staggering. Suddenly, Harry was not just a prince without immediate expectation to inherit the throne. He was a prince without formal placement in the succession at all. His children, previously guaranteed a symbolic link to the monarchy, were cut off entirely. Legal experts and constitutional scholars immediately weighed in, attempting to interpret what this meant. In traditional terms, the line of succession is governed by a combination of common law, parliamentary statutes, and centuries-old precedent. Changing it is no small feat historically. Removal from succession has occurred only under extreme circumstances. Public reaction was immediate. Headlines proclaimed a royal shakeup and a line of succession rewrite, while social media platforms buzzed with speculation, outrage, and debate. Supporters of Harry argued that the decision was cruel, arbitrary, and emblematic of a monarchy out of touch with modern values. Critics countered that Charles had the authority to act, framing it as a necessary step to streamline succession and reduce complications within the family structure. Amidst it all, the truth remained shrouded in secrecy, leaving the public and the royal family grappling with uncertainty. The personal impact on Harry was, naturally, profound. Imagine being raised with the knowledge that your lineage carries historical significance, only to find that your place in that history has been nullified. The removal from succession was more than symbolic, it was existential. It forced Harry to question his role, not just in the family, but in the narrative that had defined him since birth. Every milestone, every public engagement, every decision he had made in service of or parallel to the crown now carried a different weight. The institution that once defined him had effectively redefined him, and the emotional fallout was immediate. For Archie and Lilibet, the implications were different but equally significant. While too young to fully understand the legal ramifications, the emotional and symbolic impact cannot be overstated. In the eyes of the institution, they had been erased from a chain of continuity stretching back centuries. For their parents, the protective instinct surged. Harry and Meghan now faced the challenge of shielding their children from the public spectacle, while also grappling with the knowledge that their status had been fundamentally altered. The stakes were personal, emotional, and deeply intertwined with the public's gaze. Historically, the royal family has faced succession disputes, but modern precedent is remarkably sparse. The last comparable upheavals occurred in eras dominated by political machinations, war, or religious edicts. In the 21st century, such an abrupt excision from succession is practically unheard of. For legal scholars, this raises questions about both the limits of royal authority and the potential for future challenges. Could Harry or his children contest the decision? Would Parliament intervene? And how would this act reshape public perceptions of fairness and legitimacy within the monarchy? The palace's official narrative focused on legality, tradition, and duty. Public statements emphasized that the decision was within the king's prerogative, framed as a necessary step to streamline the line of succession and reduce potential complications. But behind closed doors, the emotional and familial tensions were undeniable. Sources described tense meetings, whispered disagreements, and moments of profound personal confrontation. Advisors warned of public fallout, family rifts, and potential legal challenges, but the document had already been signed, and the consequences could not be undone. What makes this situation so extraordinary is the combination of personal and institutional stakes. Harry is not a casual observer in the monarchy. He is a son, a brother, a father, and a public figure. His removal from succession affects his identity, his public role, and the future of his family. It also creates a ripple effect throughout the institution itself, highlighting tensions between tradition, personal ambition, and the evolving expectations of the public. Every move, every statement, every subtle action is now magnified, analyzed, and interpret it against the backdrop of this unprecedented decision. Even the numbers tell a story. Prior to the document, Harry was fifth in line to the throne, with his children positioned immediately after him in symbolic succession. With their removal, the line narrows, creating a leaner but potentially more fragile chain. Analysts suggest that such changes could have long-term implications for the monarchy's stability, succession planning, and public perception. For the casual observer, it may seem like a technical adjustment, but for those within the family, it is deeply personal, emotionally charged, and potentially devastating. And yet, there is a paradox here. While the document formally removed Harry and his children from succession, it could also ignite a form of empowerment. Freed from the constraints of formal succession, Harry has the opportunity to redefine his role, pursue independence, and carve a legacy on his own terms. The removal may feel like a punishment, a betrayal, or an erasure, but it could also become the catalyst for a new chapter, one in which Harry's agency, choices, and influence are defined not by birthright, but by action. The world is watching, waiting to see how Harry will respond. Will he fight publicly, challenge legally, or retreat into privacy? Each option carries risks. Each choice reshapes narrative, and each move will be scrutinized under the intense glare of global attention. Meanwhile, the palace braces for reactions from the public, media, and international observers. The removal from succession is not just a family matter. It is a story with global resonance, one that questions authority, tradition, and the very nature of monarchy in the modern era. But as the dust begins to settle, one question looms larger than any other. What comes next? Harry, Archie, and Lilibet may be removed from the official line of succession, but the emotional, legal, and public battles are just beginning. Allies are forming, strategies are being plotted, and the ripple effects of this unprecedented decision are only starting to be felt. The chain may have been altered, but the story is far from over. The announcement had barely settled, and already Prince Harry was seething. Fury, the kind that makes your jaw ache and your stomach twist, had taken root in him. It wasn't just anger at the legal maneuver itself, it was the betrayal. The deep, personal wound that comes from realizing that your father, your king, the man whose approval you have chased your entire life, had just erased your place in history. Imagine that moment, standing in a palace you once felt was home, knowing that in a single act, the man who was supposed to protect your legacy had redefined it in a way that felt almost cruel. That was Harry's reality. For years, Harry had walked a fine line between duty and desire. He had followed tradition when required, attended public engagements, and fulfilled ceremonial obligations. Yet he had also sought independence, spaces where he and Meghan could live, raise their children, and shape their own future. And now, in a blink, the autonomy he had long sought seemed intertwined with a punishment he could neither anticipate nor escape. The document signed by Charles wasn't just a legal stroke. It was an emotional bombshell detonating within the core of Harry's life. Friends and confidants describe him pacing endlessly, phone in hand, trying to make sense of a reality that felt almost unreal. 1 minute, he was calculating options, analyzing potential responses. The next, he was consumed by an uncontrollable wave of emotion. Rage, grief, betrayal, fear. All of it wrapped together in a knot that no strategy or legal counsel could untangle immediately. To the outside world, Harry had always appeared composed, sometimes even aloof. But behind closed doors, the man who had once run from cameras now wrestled with feelings that burned brighter than any spotlight could illuminate. This fury was not impulsive. It was deliberate, measured, and incredibly private. Harry knew the optics of reacting publicly could backfire, both for him and for Meghan. They had spent years learning the dangerous dance between media and monarchy, and now that dance had grown more complicated. Every statement, every gesture, every leak, even accidental ones, could be weaponized by both sides of the family feud. Yet the private intensity of Harry's anger was unlike anything he had expressed before. He felt cornered, invalidated, and deeply misunderstood, and that combination created a pressure cooker atmosphere in which every small decision carried enormous weight. Part of the fury came from the emotional calculus of watching his children lose something they had no control over. Archie and Lilibet, still so young, were now formally removed from succession, their lives reshaped before they could even understand what it meant. For Harry, the protective instinct was overwhelming. He felt rage not just at his father, but at an institution that, in a single stroke, disregarded the emotional and personal impact on his family. And in that private fury, strategy began to emerge. This wasn't just about anger. It was about survival, dignity, and reclaiming agency over a life that had been suddenly altered. Confidants recount tense, late-night discussions between Harry and Meghan, moments where the couple grappled with disbelief, frustration, and heartbreak. These conversations were raw, unfiltered, and filled with emotion that never reached the cameras. Meghan, as always, played a dual role, anchor and advocate. She absorbed some of the fury, directed some of it, and helped channel it into actionable steps. Together, they began to map the landscape, legal avenues, public responses, and private strategies for navigating a family that had just declared war, silently but unmistakably. One source close to Harry describes a particularly intense moment, a quiet hour in a private residence, surrounded by documents, letters, and legal notes. The prince's hands shook slightly as he reviewed the signed document, reading and rereading the words that had just shifted centuries of expectation. Every sentence, every clause, was a reminder that the monarchy was capable of decisive, unilateral action, even against its own members. "It's like they just erased us," he is reported to have said, voice low but taut with emotion. That sentiment captures the essence of Harry's private fury. The shock of seeing your life, your legacy, your family position literally rewritten, with little warning and no discussion. But Harry's anger was not just reactive, it was analytical. He understood the mechanics of power, the weight of precedent, and the potential for retaliation. The fury drove him to consider every angle, from the legal implications to the emotional consequences. He questioned advisors, consulted allies, and began to map the terrain for what could come next. There was an understanding, unspoken but clear. If he was to survive this storm, he would need more than fury. He would need precision, strategy, and allies both inside and outside the palace walls. At the same time, there were moments of disbelief so profound that Harry could barely process them. He thought about his own childhood, about his relationship with his father, about the years spent trying to balance duty with personal happiness. Every memory seemed reframed now through the lens of betrayal. Even experiences that had once felt empowering, his military service, public engagements, charitable work, were now tinged with frustration. Had he been operating under a false assumption all along, believing that loyalty would be met with fairness? That faith in family would be reciprocated? The document suggested otherwise. And yet, in the midst of fury and grief, there were flashes of resolve. Harry's private anger was not passive. It was mobilizing. It pushed him to act, to consider options, and to envision strategies for protecting his children, preserving his legacy, and maintaining some measure of control over a life that suddenly felt destabilized. Fury became fuel, grief became motivation, and the sense of betrayal became a call to action. The private storm inside Harry was transforming from raw emotion into calculated intent. But the personal wasn't the only battlefield. Word of the removal from succession leaked quickly, setting off a firestorm in the media. Reporters, commentators, and social media users dissected every detail, speculated about motives, and debated the fairness of the king's actions. Harry's private fury now had to contend with public pressure. Every leak, every rumor, every headline risked undermining his credibility or inflaming tensions further. The stakes had grown exponentially. He wasn't just reacting to a family decision. He was navigating a global stage where every misstep could be magnified 1,000-fold. In those first hours, the prince's fury was both a shield and a sword. It protected him from the shock, gave him the clarity to strategize, and armed him with the emotional firepower to confront what came next. Allies, advisors, and confidants noted the intensity of the moment. A man balancing heartbreak with tactical precision, anger with calculation, grief with strategy. The combination was volatile, but it was necessary. Harry's private fury was not chaos. It was preparation for a storm whose dimensions no one yet fully understood. And then came the first hint of escalation. A private letter, a confidential conversation, or a carefully whispered warning. It's unclear which, but suddenly, Harry realized that the palace's move was only the opening salvo. The battle over succession, identity, and legacy was just beginning. Fury would be the catalyst, but strategy and courage would define what came next. The private storm inside Harry was far from over, and the world had yet to see the full force of a man who had been pushed to the edge, determined not to be erased quietly. While Harry was consumed by private fury, Meghan Markle was already thinking 3 steps ahead. If Harry's anger was raw, unfiltered, and immediate, Meghan's response was measured, strategic, and calculated. She understood that this was no ordinary family dispute. This was an unprecedented upheaval that affected not just titles and succession, but the emotional and public well-being of their entire family. For Meghan, there was no time for shock alone. There was work to be done. The first reaction, insiders say, was disbelief. Meghan had anticipated friction, media scrutiny, and tension with the palace. But nothing could have prepared her for the legal erasure of her children from succession. Archie and Lilibet, young, innocent, and entirely dependent on her guidance, were suddenly thrust into a public spectacle they did not ask for. Meghan's instinct was immediately protective. She recognized the psychological weight this decision would carry for her children, and she prioritized shielding them from as much of the fallout as possible. At the same time, Meghan's mind raced with strategy. She had long been aware of the complexities of royal life. The delicate balancing act between duty, public image, and personal freedom. She knew that reacting impulsively could backfire, creating optics that the palace could exploit. And yet, inaction was equally dangerous. To Meghan, the moment demanded a dual approach. Protect her family, while simultaneously preparing to respond in ways that would safeguard their future. It was a high-stakes chess game, with every move scrutinized by both the public and the palace. One of Meghan's first steps was to establish a network of trusted advisors and confidants. Lawyers, media strategists, and family friends were brought into confidential conversations, each tasked with evaluating options, predicting consequences, and preparing contingencies. Meghan approached the situation with a clarity that contrasted with Harry's raw fury. While Harry was processing emotion, Meghan was mapping strategy. She understood that their response would need to navigate multiple arenas simultaneously: legal, public, and personal. Her protective instincts extended beyond strategy. Meghan focused on managing the immediate emotional well-being of her children. Reports suggest that she limited their exposure to news coverage, carefully curated what they were told, and emphasized reassurance and love. Archie and Lilibet, while too young to understand the full legal implications, were aware of tension and uncertainty. Meghan's guidance sought to buffer them from the adult complexities while still preparing them for a future in which their lives had already been altered by forces beyond their control. At the same time, Meghan considered the public dimension. Social media had erupted, global media outlets were speculating, and the world was watching closely. Every statement, every action, every public appearance could be interpreted as retaliation, weakness, or political maneuvering. Meghan understood that controlling the narrative was crucial. She worked with Harry to craft messages that were truthful yet measured, emotional yet strategic, highlighting their humanity without giving ammunition to critics. In this sense, Meghan's role was both shield and amplifier, protecting the family while ensuring their perspective was heard. Analysts note that Meghan's approach has always been proactive. From her early days in the royal family to her post-royal life, she has demonstrated a keen sense of media management, legal awareness, and personal branding. In the face of this crisis, those skills became vital. She anticipated leaks, prepared responses to speculation, and guided Harry away from reactions that might escalate tensions unnecessarily. Her ability to separate emotional reaction from strategic action was, in many ways, the counterbalance to Harry's private fury. Together, they formed a team: Harry, raw and driven by emotion; Meghan, deliberate and driven by strategy. Yet, despite her calm exterior, the stakes were intensely personal. Meghan was not just strategizing for headlines or legal leverage. She was fighting for her family's dignity, security, and future. Every decision involved an emotional calculus. How to protect her children, how to support Harry, and how to respond to a system that had just disregarded their place in it. The legal and political dimensions were complex, but for Meghan, the human dimension was paramount. Reports suggest that she also began quietly rallying allies within the media, philanthropic circles, and legal networks. Meghan's reputation as a savvy communicator meant she could influence narratives without appearing confrontational. Carefully placed interviews, statements, and public appearances served to counter misinformation and build public sympathy. It was a subtle but powerful form of influence, one that relied on control, timing, and an understanding of perception. Meghan's strategy also included anticipating the palace's next moves. She understood that this was not just a reactionary moment, it was a pivot point. King Charles had made a decisive action, but what followed would likely involve further communications, symbolic gestures, or legal maneuvers. Meghan's planning accounted for worst-case scenarios, additional public statements, private ultimatums, or leaks designed to sway public opinion. Her approach was comprehensive, defensive, and offensive simultaneously. At the emotional core, Meghan also sought to stabilize Harry. She recognized that his private fury, while justified, could be strategically dangerous if expressed publicly. Through calm counsel, patience, and careful redirection, she helped him channel that anger into actionable steps. She balanced empathy with pragmatism, validating his emotions while insisting on strategic restraint. In essence, Meghan became the anchor amidst the storm, ensuring that while Harry's fury burned privately, it did not consume their ability to act effectively. Insiders reveal that during this period, Meghan also reflected on the long-term implications for their children. She considered how Archie and Lilibet would perceive this moment in the years to come, how public perception might shape their experiences, and how best to maintain a sense of identity and security. Her decisions were guided by both immediate necessity and long-term vision, a duality that defined her approach to the crisis. The dynamic between Meghan and Harry in these first critical hours illustrates a balance of emotion and strategy rarely visible to the public. Harry provided passion, urgency, and raw energy. Meghan provided clarity, foresight, and tactical planning. Together, they formed a resilient unit, capable of navigating both the emotional and practical challenges of a situation that could have destabilized a lesser team. And yet, despite this carefully calibrated approach, tension remained high. Every potential move had consequences. Every decision could be scrutinized or weaponized. Allies and advisors offered conflicting advice. Legal experts debated potential remedies. The media speculated endlessly. And through it all, Meghan remained focused, resolute, and determined to protect her family from a system that had just demonstrated its willingness to erase them. The moment the document removing Harry, Archie, and Lilibet from the line of succession became public, the world erupted. What had been a private storm inside Buckingham Palace instantly became a global spectacle. News outlets scrambled to cover every detail. Social media exploded with commentary, and ordinary people felt compelled to weigh in on a story that was equal parts personal drama and constitutional upheaval. For the Sussexes, the media frenzy was immediate, overwhelming, and relentless. From the first headlines, the narrative was fractured. Some outlets framed it as a cold, calculated move by King Charles to streamline succession. Others portrayed it as an act of personal betrayal, painting Harry and Meghan as victims of an unforgiving family. Social media was even more volatile. Hashtags exploded, trending topics surged, and millions shared opinions, often extreme, sometimes cruel, and occasionally insightful. In this chaotic environment, every word mattered, every leak amplified, and every visual scrutinized. The media frenzy was not just about reporting. It was a form of pressure, a weapon that could influence public perception, destabilize personal relationships, and even impact legal outcomes. Tabloids ran speculative stories suggesting palace drama, secret confrontations, and whispered ultimatums. International media, from the United States to Australia, covered the story with equal intensity, emphasizing both the novelty of the event and the emotional dimensions. The story became global, tapping into fascination with royalty, family conflict, and personal betrayal on an epic scale. For Harry and Meghan, this frenzy was a battlefield. On one side were journalists, eager for scoops, insiders, and exclusive interviews. On the other were commentators, pundits, and online communities dissecting every statement or misstep. Every post, every story, every rumor became a potential escalation. Harry's private fury, Meghan's strategic planning, and their emotional responses were now intertwined with a media machine capable of amplifying conflict exponentially. And yet, the couple understood the stakes. Both had navigated media storms before, from the relentless paparazzi to the vitriol of tabloids. But this was different. This wasn't a fleeting scandal or a sensational headline. It was a structural shift that questioned their place in history. As such, media management became as critical as any legal or familial maneuver. Every statement had to be precise, every appearance calculated, and every leak anticipated. Failure to control the narrative risked public perception of weakness, culpability, or disarray. Insiders describe a flurry of communications between Meghan, Harry, and their advisors in the first hours after the news broke. Lawyers assessed statements for potential legal pitfalls. Media strategists evaluated which messages could be released and which needed restraint. Public relations teams monitored the global response in real time. Every piece of information was scrutinized for impact, tone, and framing. The Sussexes were fighting on multiple fronts, emotionally, strategically, and publicly. The frenzy also created contradictions in the narrative. Some media claimed Harry had been expecting the move. Others suggested it was completely unexpected. Some framed Meghan as a manipulative force. Others lauded her protective instincts and strategic acumen. Every story pulled public perception in different directions, making it impossible for outsiders to know the truth. For Harry and Meghan, this ambiguity was both a blessing and a curse. It allowed some narrative control, but also fueled speculation that could undermine their position. Social media became particularly intense. Platforms like Twitter, Instagram, and TikTok exploded with opinions, memes, and analyses. Fans of the Sussexes rallied in support, creating hashtags, petitions, and viral posts defending the couple and their children. Critics, however, accused them of overreacting, questioned their motives, and speculated about internal palace politics. The sheer volume of attention created a feedback loop. Each public reaction influenced media coverage, which in turn influenced social media, escalating the frenzy further. In this environment, the Sussexes had to make strategic choices. Every public statement carried risk, too emotional, and they might appear vindictive, too restrained, and they might be perceived as powerless. Every leak, whether intentional or accidental, could be weaponized against them. And while the palace worked to maintain a controlled narrative emphasizing tradition, legality, and calm, Harry and Meghan were forced to navigate a media landscape that was chaotic, global, and unpredictable. Some insiders suggest that the intensity of the coverage surprised even experienced media professionals. Within hours, stories appeared in dozens of languages, across multiple time zones, and with endless variations. Each outlet, each journalist, and each commentator interpreted the story through their own lens, often highlighting aspects that aligned with their editorial bias. For the Sussexes, controlling the message required constant vigilance, careful coordination, and unflinching attention to detail. Yet the frenzy also provided opportunities. Carefully released statements, strategic interviews, and well-timed social media posts allowed Harry and Meghan to counter misinformation, clarify their perspective, and influence public sentiment. By leveraging the frenzy, they could ensure that their narrative, focused on family, legacy, and emotional truth, remained part of the global conversation. It was a delicate balance. Navigate the chaos without being consumed by it, shape the story without inflaming conflict, and protect their children while confronting a narrative being written by millions of external voices. The emotional toll of the media frenzy cannot be understated. For Harry and Meghan, every headline was a reminder of the stakes. Every image, every quote, every rumor had potential consequences for their children, their relationship with the monarchy, and their personal well-being. The pressure was relentless, constant, and often exhausting. Yet, even amid the chaos, they understood the power of narrative and the necessity of deliberate, calculated responses. And as the frenzy continued, cracks began to appear within the palace itself. Insiders reported conflicting statements, internal disagreements, and rising tensions between advisors, family members, and media teams. What began as a carefully managed institutional response increasingly became a fragmented narrative, shaped as much by emotion and speculation as by official statements. Harry and Meghan, though removed from succession, now found themselves in the center of a global debate about tradition, fairness, and the future of monarchy itself. To understand the seismic impact of Harry, Archie, and Lilibet being removed from the line of succession, it's crucial to step back and examine history. Monarchies are steeped in centuries of tradition, ceremony, and codified rules, and succession disputes have always been among the most dramatic, and sometimes deadly, events in royal history. Yet, in the modern era, the situation facing Harry and his children is unprecedented in its combination of personal, legal, and emotional dimensions. Succession crises have shaped history for as long as monarchies have existed. Think of England's Wars of the Roses in the 15th century, when rival branches of the royal family fought violently for the throne, or the Glorious Revolution of 1688, which forced James II from power in favor of William and Mary. In those times, succession was a matter of survival. Lives were lost, families torn apart, and the political landscape reshaped. The stakes were existential. One misstep could mean death, exile, or permanent disgrace. While modern royal families do not face the same life and death stakes, the emotional and symbolic stakes remain immense, particularly in the public eye. In the United Kingdom, the succession rules have evolved considerably over time. The Act of Settlement of 1701 sets strict guidelines regarding religion and marriage, while the Succession to the Crown Act of 2013 introduced gender-neutral succession, allowing the eldest child, regardless of gender, to inherit the throne. These reforms modernized the monarchy, but they did not eliminate the potential for familial tension or public scrutiny when succession is altered. What makes Harry's case so extraordinary is that no legislation or traditional clause explicitly predicted the unilateral removal of a royal family member and their children from succession without cause such as treason, abdication, or disqualifying marriage. There are examples of royals losing their place in succession, but they are rare and usually tied to personal choices or religious rules. Edward VIII's abdication in 1936 is a famous precedent. His decision to marry Wallis Simpson, a divorcee, led him to relinquish the throne, permanently removing him from succession. However, Edward's choice was voluntary. Harry and his children, by contrast, had no choice in their removal. This distinction is critical. The act is not a consequence of their actions, but a top-down decision imposed by the reigning monarch. In that sense, it's a form of historical anomaly, a situation that blends personal dynamics, legal authority, and public perception in a way that modern precedent cannot fully explain. Another relevant example is King George III's family, where disputes over titles, marriages, and inheritance led to long-standing tensions between siblings and their heirs. While no one was removed from succession entirely, the dynamics of favoritism, perceived injustice, and familial strife are strikingly similar to Harry's current predicament. Historical accounts reveal that such disputes often festered over years, sometimes decades, poisoning relationships and influencing public opinion. Harry's situation mirrors that tension, albeit in a modern context amplified by 24-hour news cycles and social media scrutiny. The House of Windsor itself has experienced moments of controversy, though none quite like this. The abdication crisis of Edward VIII, the scandal surrounding Princess Margaret's personal choices, and even Diana's strained relationship with the royal family provide historical parallels in terms of emotional conflict and media scrutiny. But again, none of these cases involved the formal removal of a line of succession that directly impacted children. This combination of personal, legal, and familial dimensions is what sets Harry's situation apart. It is history repeating itself in spirit, but evolving in form to match the complexities of the modern age. Legal scholars and historians alike point to the lack of clear precedent as a source of both intrigue and uncertainty. In centuries past, decisions about succession were often driven by political necessity, religious authority, or sheer power. Today, the monarchy is as much a public institution as it is a private family, and any move carries dual consequences: the legal and symbolic act within the institution and the public's perception, which shapes legitimacy. Harry's removal touches both spheres in a way that history rarely has. It is simultaneously personal and institutional, emotional and legal, a perfect storm of royal upheaval. Psychologically, the implications are profound. Being removed from succession is not just a procedural change, it is a symbolic erasure. Historians note that such actions historically have caused long-lasting emotional trauma, damaged family relationships, and even shifted alliances within the monarchy. Harry's private fury, Meghan's strategic response, and the media frenzy we've already covered are all manifestations of a human response to a deeply destabilizing precedent. The echoes of history are clear. When family, power, and tradition collide, the fallout is rarely contained. Even modern monarchs, while more constrained by law and media scrutiny, have had to navigate similar tensions. Queen Elizabeth II herself faced numerous familial and political challenges during her reign, balancing personal loyalty with public duty. She understood that decisions regarding succession, titles, and family roles could have long-lasting ramifications, both legally and emotionally. The document signed by Charles can be seen in this context, a decision intended to clarify succession, yet one that simultaneously disrupts familial bonds and public expectations, a delicate balancing act gone awry. For Harry and Meghan, the historical precedents offer both caution and insight. They reveal that the monarchy is capable of decisive action, that family dynamics can be brutally altered, and that public perception often amplifies private conflicts. But they also show that precedent is not destiny. History is full of examples where individuals responded creatively, strategically, and resiliently to institutional pressures. Harry and Meghan now face a choice: succumb to the constraints of history, or navigate this unprecedented situation with foresight, strategy, and agency. What comes next will reveal whether Harry and Meghan can shape their own legacy in the shadow of centuries-old traditions, or whether the historical patterns of royal conflict will define them in ways beyond their control. The document was signed. The media frenzy roared. Historical precedents were debated. But behind closed doors, the real story was unfolding in whispers, private conversations, and tense confrontations, the fallout within the royal family itself. Removing Harry, Archie, and Lilibet from the line of succession was not just a legal maneuver. It was a seismic emotional event, reverberating through relationships that had already been fragile. The palace, often seen as an impenetrable symbol of unity, was anything but. Sources suggest that the immediate aftermath was a mix of shock, anger, and disbelief. For some senior royals, the decision seemed necessary, an effort to streamline succession, reduce potential complications, and preserve the monarchy's public image. For others, it was viewed as a betrayal, a rupture in trust that went far beyond protocol. Private conversations reportedly grew heated, with family members debating the wisdom of the move, questioning its fairness, and, in some cases, expressing sympathy for Harry and Meghan. But sympathy did little to heal the wound. The act had already been formalized, leaving personal relationships strained and uncertain. Prince William, as Harry's elder brother and next in line after Charles, was reportedly caught in a difficult position. Sources indicate that he was aware of the emotional and political ramifications of the decision, yet he faced the delicate task of maintaining loyalty to both his father and his brother. Conversations between the siblings, while not publicly disclosed, were described as tense and emotionally charged. Frustration, hurt, and unspoken accusations lingered in the air. The relationship that had once been defined by camaraderie, mutual support, and childhood adventures was suddenly overshadowed by distance, resentment, and unspoken tension. Meanwhile, other members of the royal family reportedly struggled with how to navigate their own positions. Aunties, cousins, and senior advisors were forced to pick sides, or at least choose how visible their opinions would be. Any public alignment with Harry or Meghan risked backlash. Silence could be interpreted as complicity. Family dinners, private gatherings, and even casual conversations were now layered with the potential for political and personal consequences. The decision had created not just a public spectacle, but an internal minefield, where every word and action carried weight far beyond the ordinary. For Harry and Meghan, the fallout was deeply personal. Trust had been fractured, and relationships once considered unshakable were now uncertain. Sources report that Harry felt a sense of betrayal from family members he had long relied upon for support, while Meghan navigated the complex emotional landscape with strategic caution. Together, they had to recalibrate their approach, balancing family loyalty with self-preservation, love with practicality, and emotional response with public messaging. Every interaction with extended family became a negotiation, every private meeting a test of loyalty and understanding. Even the younger generation was affected. William's children, George, Charlotte, and Louis, though still largely insulated from palace politics, were now part of a family dynamic marked by tension and division. Reports suggest that their interactions with Archie and Lilibet, when they occurred, were cautious and polite, underscored by an awareness of the broader conflict. The subtle emotional impact on children, observers note, cannot be underestimated. Family rifts at this level resonate deeply, even if not immediately understood. The fallout extended beyond bloodlines. Advisors, private secretaries, and palace staff suddenly found themselves navigating a precarious landscape. Loyalties were tested, communications monitored, and daily routines disrupted. Some staff reportedly attempted to mediate, offering counsel or arranging meetings to defuse tension. Others remained silent, wary of being drawn into a conflict where personal and professional consequences were intertwined. The ripple effects of the decision touched every corner of the institution, revealing vulnerabilities that few outside the palace could imagine. One insider described a particularly tense private meeting in the hours following the announcement. Voices reportedly rose, accusations were whispered, and emotions flared. Harry and Charles, father and son, were said to be at an impasse. Harry insisting on recognition, fairness, and a voice in his family's future. Charles emphasizing duty, authority, and precedent. Meghan, as always, served as both advocate and strategist, tempering the intensity while reinforcing Harry's position. The conversation ended without resolution, leaving the emotional fallout unresolved and simmering beneath the surface. Public perception mirrored the internal chaos. Social media, tabloids, and international media outlets speculated endlessly about the family's internal dynamics, often exaggerating tension.